Hi everyone, this is Nico Valdivia Hennig. I'm a PhD candidate in the University of California, Riverside. I'm also co-founder at Niebla Games, a video game indie studio based in Valparaíso, Chile. And I'm co-founder of 𝗔𝗯𝘀𝘁𝗿𝗁, an art collective based in Southern California. All these hats are important because are relevant to the project that I'm going to be sharing today, that it's called Resonating Histories, Guaman Poma and Machiavelli in Pixel Art. So today I'm going to be sharing about the creation process behind Hawk and Puma, a game about the indigenous chronicler Felipe Guaman Poma de Ayala. So please let me share with you just 1 minute of video. In case that you would like to know more about the game, it's free, available on nieblaGames.io, Hawk and Puma. You just need to click here where it says Run Game, and you're going to be able to play it. You can just play it in the window, or you can press here to play it full screen. Okay, with that said, let's continue with the presentation. So, for this project, I've been exploring methodologies on research creation from a digital humanities perspective based on my own previous experience doing research when facing the creation endeavor for video games and for board games. So usually what it's usual to understand is that research is a fundamental phase on every creation, right? But usually research is not a starting point. Usually we have like the beginning, the starting ideas, our drives, motivations, etc. And then ideally we would have a research work where we are going to think about the concept, the design, and the benchmark or the other projects, pieces, or games that are available out there so we can compare and to know like what we want to explore in a better way, what has been done by other people, and then we will proceed to a consolidation phase. That's when we think about testing, iterations, and leveraging what we want to do on the game making side, and then what it's called sometimes the other 200% when we need to look for like the serious funding, the production, and once you put it out there, hoping for the best, right? In the like research, it's going to be here in this point. But in this approach that I'm exploring, I'm thinking about the research creation in an spiraling movement, but research is our starting point. So we are going to have some academic drives, some theoretical approaches, and our own personal ethical and political standpoint. And then we have some desired outcomes that we want to do with this research creation process. Always this is a spiraling process, so we're going to go back and revisit every step, every previous step, of course. And in this case, the outreach, the impact, and education about women's working life was the starting point for this project. And then we will have a creation phase where ideally we're going to think about the skills that I have, the community that it's around me, or the team that I would like to work with, the theoretical balance, and the format. In this case, through a video game, a minimal video game using open source tools. And also the theoretical balance, it's fundamental when we think about research creation, because we can't put like any complete theory into just one piece. we need to think about the our starting research, right, the theoretical approach, but then the desired outcome is going to be crucial to think about the theoretical balance that we want to consider on this research creation piece. And then, just like in any other kind of creation, we're going to have that other 200% where we need to look for funding, the production, and once we put it out there, hoping for the best. So research and creation are here, but we can understand that it's a spiraling process. So this project, it's about the life and work of Felipe Guaman Poma de Ayala. Felipe Guaman Poma de Ayala was an indigenous chronicler that lived in the 15 and 1600 in this, what we call today the Sundondo Valley in Peru. He traveled extensively documenting social injustices and exploitation under the colonial rule. So it's important to understand that he was an indigenous person of a transitional period when the colonizers got into the Andes, where the Andean region that today we call Bolivia and Peru. And he was taught in Spanish by a Jesuit priest, and he learned Spanish, and he worked as a translator. But then he started writing a huge titanic piece called De Primer Nueva Crónica y Buen Gobierno, or the First New Chronicle and Good Government, a 1,000 pages letter with 400 handwritten illustrations denouncing the abuses of the colonial rule or regime. This work was addressed to the King Philip III of Spain. Just like it's hard to think about a person writing to the king under the Western paradigm, Guaman, in his own context, he felt worthy to do this work, to denounce and to look for justice for his people. Now, thinking on the theoretical framework of this project, I'm starting from a decolonial thought theoretical approach where, just to make like a quick explanation, we think about colonization as the particular event that we could think at the end of the 1400s, but colonialism, it's an ongoing process that it's still happening till this day. Coloniality will be the structures that support and make possible the colonialism, the ongoing process of colonialism that we can, again, we can see till this day. And the decolonial theory, it's a reframing paradigm. It's a theory that that has a transformational aim that would like to change the colonial structures through structural transformation. So that's what we are going to call decolonization. We have some thinkers that, like Aníbal Quijano, Enrique Dussel, Walter Miñolo, that are part of this tradition, and we have Silvia Rivera 𝗔𝗯𝘁𝗁, that it's the one that has been more influential in my case, and she's also a thinker that feels awkward and uncomfortable with the colonial label, because sometimes the coloniality tends to become like an academic trend, or everything needs to be the colonial, but it's fundamental to understand that this is a structural transformation call. We're thinking about reframing paradigm like that. We need to call to action, especially nowadays where we have like terrible circumstances, wars and genocides going on, and that are moved by colonial interest. And we need to address them, we need to think about them, and we need to stand firmly, especially nowadays where freedom of speech it's being suppressed in so many places in the world. So Silvia Rivera 𝗔𝗯𝘁𝗁, as a decolonial, or what we could call like a decolonial thinker, she coined this particular term that has been fundamental for the research creation process on hog and puma, that it's the cheje. The cheje, written like this, it's an Aymara concept for spotted or for stained. And it's an invitation to think about ourselves not just like in binaries like zeros or one, black and white, and not as gradients of those. It's not from in a gray point between black and white, or in a 0 point something between 0 and 1. It's to understand that all of us are stained. All of us have different parts inside us that are like ideologies, emotions, stories, and cultures that are even contradictory with another parts of ourselves. And it's a call to think about ourselves from this starting contradiction, and that are parts that are contradictory but not necessarily excluding, and we can take them because we can think about just like resolving conflicts when we are starting from that contradiction. And she invited us to think about that in a productive way so we can really transform and restructure the reality and the future, understanding like this starting contradiction in all of us. So instead of trying to pretend resolutions, we need to think about the potential of this part of all of us. Positionality. Every time that we're doing creative work, we need to address our own positionality and to be conscious about it because it's going to impact our own work. In this case, for me, the personal tensions and acknowledge them, it's fundamental. Like, for example, Guaman lived in the Andes, in this area. And I'm not from that high part of the Andes. I'm from Chile. It's a country that, especially in the north, had like Inca influence. But I grew up in Patagonia and in Valparaiso. Those are regions like that are not exactly Guamans. And I'm not trying to speak for Guaman. I'm not trying to appropriate Guaman's work, but Guaman's life and work speaks about the colonial history of Latin America. So I need to be conscious and to acknowledge that working with this piece, even though now it has become kind of a new classic in the Latin American literature, or it is, because it was recently rediscovered like 100 years ago, only after centuries after its disappearance. But it's also like the tension on working on what tries to become like the new universal. So that's part of the tension. From my own ethical and political standpoints, I already mentioned that I'm starting from a decolonial framework and I want to contribute with my work to the coloniality or horizon. And also, I'm starting this project against the myth of the solo dev. In game making, it's pretty common to try to put in an altar the creators when they say that they make games just by themselves. But as much individual a works pretends to be, the more unrecognized labor we're going to find. Like, for example, who developed the tools, who is the people supporting the person that it's working. And this is a project that starts like standing against towards a recognition of the labor of all the people when we're doing this kind of work, against also the temptation on thinking about ourselves as the solo creators. So in this case, the research creation process turned me into materiality. And the materiality starts with the ink, with the weaving, and then the pixels. On the ink, we have Guaman's illustrations. He used the ink that was given to him to translate these legal documents that were part of the colonial structures through law to deepen the dispossession of the indigenous peoples of the region. And ink was something that Guaman used as in form of resistance to draw and write a letter to the King of Spain denouncing the abuses. So ink is part of the material that I'm always thinking on this work. Weaving, that it's a practice that it's fundamental in the Andes till this day, and that Guaman wrote and drew extensively about. He drew like the bright side of weaving, and he drew the abuses of the colonizers to the weavers, knowing that it was impacting and that was like a huge damage to their whole culture and community. And lastly, pixels, to think about it not just as the projected light, but also like the small cells that are able to do it and where those materials come from. And we need to think about all the traces and the blood traces that we have when the North is imposing economic and political circumstances in places that are just as a place for extractivism for them. And every screen needs to be a reminder of what is going on and the colonial legacy of the current state of technology and the economic relationships that support them. And also, part of this research creation process is the research that goes when we are doing this research creation. And here is where we have this particular and curious relationship that we may find between Guaman Poma and Niccolò Machiavelli. While doing the research, I was like diving into the materiality of Guaman's work, Guaman's history, and I found the prints in a different space, and suddenly, with this playful thinking on doing like this speculative fiction of about woman, I found this piece, and suddenly, like, both started to interweave in a deep, like, and meaningful way. That's how suddenly I noticed how Guaman's work on the New Chronicle and Good Government and Machiavelli's on the Prince had so many things in common. For example, Machiavelli died only a few years before Guaman's Probable's birth. So at least that's fascinating. Okay, that's curious. At least that's curious. But then, when we put those works together, it's like both wrote about power, governance, religion, and sovereignty. The New Chronicle and Good Government and the Prince, right? Guaman Poma wrote his work to the King Philip III of Spain, while Machiavelli wrote The Prince to Lorenzo de Medici or The Prince of Florence. So both are writing to the crown, to nobility. And both are emblematic figures of major historical and political and cultural transitions. In the case of Guaman, the colonization of the Inca region, and Machiavelli, the transition that's part of the Renaissance and the modern state. That also are completely related. There's no Renaissance without the expropriation of the resources of the colonized regions, like Guaman's, right? So I wanted to put this tension in play through this research creation process on Hawk and Puma. And that's how I started interweaving these two works, creating this speculative dialogue from this Cheche perspective, thinking about the contradictions of the on studying this now in my case from the north, like in California, being from Chile, being also like a game designer and understanding the history of the particular medium of the video game, but that we can expand to the idea of game in different regions. I started to thinking about my own positionality in a Cheche context, like being from Latin America, having like influences, like we have like a huge like Western worldview, but with a lot of influence still of indigenous perspectives that we need to continue exploring and giving value and giving value to the people that are resisting till this day into the colonial rule that are trying to erase them. And for me, it was an invitation to think about resistance and hybridization through this project. So the concept of Cheche implies the coexistence of opposites, a conflicting intersection that resists easy resolution. And in this case, it's thinking on putting Guaman and Machiavelli, but in a structure where Guaman is the main figure, where we are trying to think as much from this context that his work and life and yeah and situation that authors like Silvio Rivera Cusicanqui help us to understand or to read from this contemporary time, and Machiavelli being an external figure that it's always questioning Woman's work and intentions, motives, methods, and all what Woman is doing into like his search to look for justice for his people. So in the game, we're going to have Guaman as the protagonist, and we're going to find this spirit called Maki. So if you go and play it, or if you watch the video of the game, you're going to notice that there's like this mysterious figure called Maki that it's an incarnation of Machiavelli. So through the game, we're going to have this dialogue on Guaman being the protagonist, traveling and from his perspective, knowing the importance of drawing and writing a letter that took 10 years to be written, while there's like this Western perspective of power, like questioning his words, his methods, his intentions, and the value of his own journey. So the critical positionality, it's that from a decolonial perspective, engaging with Woman becomes a speculative proposal where the tension between indigenous and Western worldviews is not resolved through harmonious dialogue, but through confrontation that reveals the fractures of history and politics. The game doesn't pretend to just resolve and find just one proposal. There's like a constant contradiction to understand the Cheche through like an engine that help us to advance on this short experience. The game, it's also made thanks to the work of many people. Even though like I started working with this, what we could call alone, thinking about my own work as solo dev would be part of the lie, and that it's a toxic position in every kind of making. So for me, it's fundamental to address that I use Bitsy, awesome, that please go and explore it, open source tool to create little games, worlds, and stories. It's made by Adam Ledoux. And also, since it's open source and has a wonderful community, there are awesome tools created by community like the ones that you see here. This allowed me to take Guaman's work and through a digital treatment and using the tools of these of some people, I was able to turn Guaman's illustrations into playable pixels. Here we have an example and we can explore it in our own pace through this minimal game experience. I also compose an Andean inspired music using Signal. It's a great open source MIDI composer that works on browser. So this is the tool that helped me through the work of many people supporting this open source initiative. And also, of course, I'm using the work of other authors like the ones I mentioned and Guaman's. And in this case, Guaman's work is free and available in the site of the Royal Danish Library. That just like a curious information in this work, the site was like a pretty old one, and luckily, because of the work of people in the library and also like the help on the initiative on Guaman Poma and the help with Jacob from the digital curation of the museum. It served like as a push to help to revitalize the site, and now we have this current version that it's much more friendlier than the 90 site website that there was to be, that there used to be. So please go and explore it. It's awesome to explore like this fascinating work. We have the English version and the Spanish that it's in a super old Spanish. We need to understand that when approaching to this. And also we have like this fundamental part of this project. This was a call to weave not only ideas through the metaphor of the weaving that Guaman is insisting constantly, but also the idea on weaving relationships. That's how I started a collaboration with Kenia Chavez Caguana, with Cesar Sicos Yucra or ISPU, and Jessica Sicos Yucra. All of them are part of the ñawpañan community in the Sacred Valley of the Incas, Peru. They are Quechua speakers, and this as something that started as a like shy cultural consulting became like a further and deep collaboration that helped us to start like first to translate the game into Quechua. So the game is available in Quechua, in English, and in Spanish. There's no that many games in Quechua out there. And also a collaboration with the 𝗔𝗀𝘁𝘁𝗁 Andean School that works closely with the ñawpañan community. The 𝗔𝗀𝘁𝘁𝗁 Association have a school in the Sacred Valley of the Incas, which allow us to do a further collaboration. So we went to the school, we work with the community, and this allow us to start a new initiative called Andean Futures that I co-founded with Kenya. That is basically a ludic workshop initiative where local and indigenous youth in the Sacred Valley of the Incas, in Pisac in particular, in the 𝗔𝗀𝘁𝘁𝗁 Andean School, can participate in ludic workshops where I'm teaching them how to create video games using open source and accessible tools like Bitsy, like Downpour, like Twine, for example. So here we have some pictures of the experience. This was like a 3 days workshop. The first one, this was the pilot, so we're continue exploring, and luckily, all of them are also like really excited about us continuing. So this is just like a sneak peek of what is going to continue happening in the future. I hope to share it here too. But here we have some screenshots of like some youth working around the tool, exploring some more abstract experiences, but we also have some that did like pretty complex ones in just like 1 day or 2 days. And also we have some that wanted to explore the local ideas of like the from the animals like llamas, like llamas, for example, alpacas, but also elements that are fundamental in the Andes, like the sun, the Intihuatana, the sun, the hills, the apus, that are not just like geography, they're also like kin, they have a kinship relationship, they're the ancestors that they take care of us, like Amaru, the cosmic serpent, or the Chacana, the Andean cross, etc. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. And you know that Guaman Poma, it's free and available on each. And I'll be here, or you can do questions in the comments or wherever you feel comfortable, and I'll be happily I'll be happy to answer them. So thank you so much.